Pre-registered coordinates. Drone surveillance. No escape route. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. The Ka-52 Alligator is Russia's most lethal attack helicopter. A twin-seat, coaxial rotor machine built to survive conditions that would destroy anything else. It carries 12 anti-tank missiles. It can engage targets at 10 kilometers. Its pilots believed they were untouchable. For most of this war, they were right. But on a peninsula ringed by water, Russian air defense batteries, reinforced revetments, and camouflage netting, a Ukrainian long-range drone package was already in position. Waiting. Silent. The pilots were coming home from a long day of frontline sorties. Rotors were spinning down. Ground crews were running pre-maintenance checks. Nobody was looking up. Nobody thought they needed to. That decision turned one of Russia's most protected rotary wing bases into a graveyard of shattered airframes before dawn. I'm your host at EastAlert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Today, we're reconstructing the most precise long-range drone strike against a Russian helicopter base in the entire history of this conflict. A strike that required months of intelligence work, a coordinated swarm of purpose-built long-range UAVs, and a level of operational patience that redefined what Ukraine can deliver deep inside Russian-controlled territory. What you're about to hear is not a story about a lucky hit, not improvisation. It's a story about a system. A Ukrainian system built specifically to find the things Russia thought it had hidden, track them, and strike at the exact moment of maximum vulnerability. The Ka-52 squadron had been operating from this Crimean base for months. Their sorties were hitting Ukrainian positions along the eastern front. Their pilots were experienced. Their helicopters were fully armed and maintained. Their base was considered one of the most hardened aviation facilities on the peninsula. Reinforced concrete revetments, multiple layers of short-range and medium-range air defense, a dedicated radar network designed to detect low-altitude threats. Russia had invested heavily in making this base survivable. Electronic warfare systems surrounded the perimeter. 300 batteries positioned nearby could engage targets at altitude. Panzer S-1 systems covered the low-level approach corridors. Tor-M, 2 units were integrated into the defensive grid. On paper, an impenetrable fortress. On paper. The problem with paper fortresses is they assume the attacker comes from a direction the defender is watching. Ukrainian drone operators had spent weeks studying the radar coverage gaps around this base. They had mapped the electromagnetic environment using signals intelligence. They had identified the timing windows when air defense crews rotated shifts, when attention was lowest, when the probability of detection was at its minimum. Which weapon do you think was the decisive factor in this strike? Was it A, the long-range drone design, B, the electronic warfare suppression, or C, the coordinated timing and swarm saturation? Comment below. The Ukrainian intelligence apparatus that made this strike possible was not built overnight. It came from painful experience, failed operations, and partial successes that slowly taught Ukrainian planners exactly how to approach a target like this one. The General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine had been collecting data on this specific squadron for a long time. Every sortie was logged. Every return to base was tracked. Flight schedules were analyzed for patterns. Ground crew activity was observed through satellite imagery provided by Allied intelligence networks. The Ka-52S that took off in the morning returned in the afternoon. They refueled, rearmed, conducted maintenance, then repeated the cycle. Every single cycle was recorded. What Ukrainian planners discovered was something the Russians had not adequately protected against. On return from frontline operations, the helicopters entered a predictable cooldown period lasting between 45 and 90 minutes. During this window, aircraft were positioned in the open, transitioning from revetment to maintenance area and back. Fuel trucks were active. Ground crews were spread across multiple aircraft simultaneously. Air defense operators, tired from long shift rotations, were at their lowest alertness. This was the window. The vulnerability no amount of concrete revetment could eliminate, because the helicopter still had to land somewhere, and when it landed, it had to stop, and when it stopped, it became a target. Stay with me. What happens in the next 18 minutes eliminates an entire Russian attack helicopter squadron from the order of battle. The drone package Ukraine assembled for this operation was not improvised. These were not commercial quadcopters modified with grenades. Ukraine deployed purpose-built long-range strike UAVs from a domestic production program that had been scaling rapidly. Each drone was designed for a specific role. The first wave carried electronic warfare payloads rather than explosives. Their mission was not to destroy, but to blind, targeting the radar systems and communications infrastructure protecting the base, creating temporary coverage gaps timed precisely with the arrival of the main strike wave. The second wave carried high-explosive warheads optimized for penetrating helicopter fuselages and igniting fuel systems, programmed with approach vectors designed to exploit the gaps created by Wave 1. The third wave carried thermobaric warheads designed to generate overpressure damage across the maintenance area where ground crews and servicing equipment were concentrated. This was not one weapon. It was a weapons system, multi-layer, multi-effect, designed to achieve specific outcomes against specific target sets in a specific sequence. Ukrainian satellite intelligence confirmed aircraft positioning in the hours before the strike. Commercial imagery cross-referenced with signals intelligence showed a cluster of 12 Ka-52 airframes concentrated in the maintenance zone adjacent to the main revetment line. 12 Ka-52 helicopters, each worth approximately $16 million at replacement cost. Combined, nearly $200 million in Russian aviation investment, concentrated in a single location, at the worst possible moment. How many helicopters did Ukraine confirm destroyed in the initial battle damage assessment? Was it A, 4, B, 7, or C, 11? Answer at the end of this video. The mission clock started during the final daylight sortie cycle. As the last Ka-52 pair returned to base and began their approach, the Ukrainian drone package was already airborne and on course. The first wave of electronic warfare drones reached their designated loiter positions around the base perimeter at a distance calculated to sit just beyond the detection threshold of the Pantsir S-1 radar systems. Then, they activated. The electromagnetic pulses these drones generated were not intended to destroy radar hardware. They flooded the electromagnetic spectrum with noise, degrading the signal-to-noise ratio for Russian air defense operators at exactly the frequency bands used by the short-range engagement systems protecting the base. Russian operators saw what appeared to be interference. Standard procedure called for investigating the source before assuming hostile action. That investigation took time. Time was the only resource Ukraine needed. The last Ka-52 touched down at approximately 6:47 in the evening. Rotors slowed. Ground crews approached from the maintenance area. Pilots began the post-flight shutdown sequence. At 6:49, the first electronic warfare drone entered its active jamming phase. Subscribe to EastAlert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Not the version the headlines tell you. What actually happened? By 6:51, Russian air defense operators were aware of an anomaly in their radar picture. The Tor M2 system operator tried to contact the Pantsir S-1 crew on the standard communication frequency. The communication was degraded. He switched to backup frequencies. Those were also experiencing interference. The base air defense officer tried to raise the regional air operations center. Contact was established but degraded. He reported an electromagnetic anomaly and requested clarification on hostile drone activity in the area. The regional center had nothing actionable to share. Ukrainian operational security had been thorough enough that no Russian early warning system detected the approach of the main strike package. 43 seconds after the electronic warfare drones entered active phase, the first strike drone crossed the outer detection threshold of the base perimeter. Then the second, then the third, fourth, and fifth in rapid succession. At 6:52 and 17 seconds, the Pantsir S-1 radar system acquired the first contact. The operator attempted to engage. The fire control radar struggled to hold track lock through the electromagnetic interference. He fired one missile on a degraded track solution. It missed. By the time a second engagement attempt was initialized, 4 strike drones had already passed within the Pantsir S-1 minimum engagement range. They were inside the wire. Ground crews working on the parked Ka-52S had approximately 8 seconds of warning before the first detonation. Maintenance technicians in the open spotted the drones at close range. Some ran. Some dropped. Most had no time to do anything at all. The first strike drone hit the second Ka-52 from the left side of the maintenance line. The warhead penetrated the fuselage directly at the main fuel cell junction. The explosion was not small. Ignited aviation fuel created a fireball that engulfed the adjacent aircraft within seconds. 3 Ka-52s burning simultaneously. Ground crews running. The base alarm sounding. The second wave had not yet arrived. The base commander, a Russian lieutenant colonel with extensive rotary wing experience, was in the operations building when the first detonations hit. His initial assumption was a missile strike, something his training had prepared him for, with specific response protocols. He immediately began executing those protocols. His protocols were designed for a different threat. They were built for a small number of large incoming missiles that could be tracked and engaged at distance, not for a swarm of small, low-observable drones arriving from multiple vectors simultaneously, already inside the perimeter before detection. The second wave arrived at 6:53 and 41 seconds. 5 additional strike drones, each approaching from a different compass bearing, converging on the maintenance area from 5 directions at once. Air defense crews trying to engage were forced to choose between targets. The Tor M2 system engaged the closest drone from the northeast, a successful intercept. The drone detonated approximately 30 meters from the maintenance line, causing blast damage but no direct aircraft impact. The remaining 4 from the second wave were not engaged in time. 2 struck the fuel storage area adjacent to the main revetment. The secondary explosions were recorded by Ukrainian ISR assets orbiting at altitude well outside Russian engagement range. The fuel fires generated a thermal signature visible from space. 1 struck a Mi-8 transport helicopter parked outside the main revetment zone. The Mi-8 was not a primary target, but it burned completely. 1 struck a Ka-52 that had partially entered its revetment. The revetment protected the helicopter from direct overpressure damage, but the fireball propagated through the opening and ignited the aircraft interior. Fires in 5 separate locations across the base. By 7:01, the base was no longer a functional aviation facility. It was a recovery operation. What would you do if you were the Russian base commander at this moment? Prioritize firefighting, evacuate personnel, or attempt to save undamaged aircraft? This is exactly the impossible choice his command structure had never prepared him to make. Drop your answer in the comments. The commander chose to prioritize personnel evacuation from the maintenance area. Tactically, given the circumstances, that was the right call. The aircraft could not be saved. The specialized ground crew personnel could be. Their training and institutional knowledge were irreplaceable in ways that airframes, at least in theory, are not. But that decision meant several Ka-52s that had survived the first 2 waves undamaged were left in position when the third wave arrived. The third wave carried thermobaric drones. These did not need to directly strike an aircraft to work. Thermobaric warheads generate an extended pressure wave that propagates around obstacles, enters enclosures, and damages through overpressure rather than fragmentation alone. The 2 thermobaric drones detonated in the central maintenance area at 7:04. The pressure wave moved outward in all directions. It entered the open revetments where surviving Ka-52 airframes were sheltered. Aircraft that had come through the direct strike waves now took structural damage from the overpressure effect. Sensitive avionics, optic systems, and rotor blade assemblies were not built to survive thermobaric overpressure at close range. Ukrainian damage assessment completed in the hours and days after the strike identified what satellite imagery and the OSINT community subsequently confirmed. Of the 12 Ka-52 airframes present at the time of the strike, 7 were destroyed outright in the direct strike phases. 3 additional airframes sustained damage assessed as beyond economical repair. 2 Ka-52s in the most heavily reinforced revetment positions survived with repairable damage. 12 aircraft entering the engagement window. 2 emerging with recoverable status. If you believe precision and patience win wars more often than mass and firepower, type EastAlert in the comments. The human cost reported by Ukrainian intelligence sources was significant, though exact figures are difficult to confirm independently. Ukrainian General Staff reporting indicated a substantial number of Russian aviation personnel were killed or wounded. Ground crew technicians working in the open maintenance area suffered the most severe casualties. Air defense crew members were largely unharmed due to their protected positions. The base commander survived. He submitted his after-action report to Russian Southern Military District Command within 48 hours. Intercepted communications suggested it was not well received. Russian Military Aviation Command faced an immediate problem. Losing this Ka-52 squadron created a significant gap in rotary wing fire support for operations in the southern sector. The helicopters could not be rapidly replaced. Ka-52 production had been constrained by the loss of Western components following sanctions. Each airframe required specialized avionics, radar systems, and targeting equipment that Russian domestic production struggled to supply in volume. Combat footage captured by Ukrainian ISR drones and verified by independent open-source intelligence analysts showed the full extent of the destruction. Burned fuselages, melted rotor blades, collapsed revetment structures where secondary explosions had undermined the concrete, fuel fire residue across the entire maintenance area. The imagery was striking, not for its chaos, but for its precision. This was not random destruction. Each damaged aircraft was damaged in a specific, identifiable way that corresponded exactly to the weapon types deployed against it. The strike had been calibrated, engineered. What NATO planners found most notable, according to analysis discussed in open Western defense forums, was not the destruction achieved, but the intelligence preparation that preceded it. The months of observation, the pattern analysis, the identification of the specific vulnerability window, the purpose-built electronic warfare suppression sequence. Ukraine was not improvising with whatever weapons happened to be available. Ukraine was operating a sophisticated, integrated strike planning process that had absorbed 2 years of intensive combat lessons and developed capabilities specifically tailored to targets like this one. The immediate Russian response was predictable and, in several respects, counterproductive. Within days, Russian aviation assets across Crimea were dispersed to multiple smaller operating locations. The intent was to prevent a similar concentration of assets from being targeted in a single strike. What it actually achieved was a significant degradation of Russian operational coordination. Aircraft operating from multiple dispersed locations required more complex logistics support. Maintenance teams were split across facilities. Spare parts delivery became more complicated. Communication between dispersed units introduced latency into operational planning cycles. The dispersal meant to protect Russian aviation instead made those assets less effective in their primary mission of supporting ground operations. This pattern has repeated throughout this conflict. When Ukraine strikes a Russian capability with sufficient precision and effect, the Russian defensive response frequently causes a secondary degradation of that same capability. The military term for this is cascading effects. Ukraine had learned to engineer for cascading effects deliberately. Now let's talk about what this battle actually teaches us. Because the tactical lessons here extend well beyond one helicopter base on one peninsula. The first lesson is about the relationship between hardening and vulnerability. The Russian base was hardened. The revetments were real. The air defense systems were functioning. The electronic warfare assets were operational. None of it prevented near-total destruction of the aircraft present. Why? Because hardening against yesterday's threats does not protect against today's. The base was hardened against cruise missiles and ballistic strikes. It was not hardened against a coordinated, multi-wave, electronic-warfare-prefaced drone swarm operating within detection gaps that had been specifically mapped over months of observation. Hardening is not protection in general. It is protection against a specific type of threat. When the threat changes, hardening becomes irrelevant. The second lesson is about economics. The Ukrainian drone package cost a fraction of what it destroyed. Conservative cost estimates for purpose-built long-range strike drones place the per-unit cost in the tens of thousands of dollars. The total package, electronic warfare drones, strike drones, thermobaric warheads, was in the low millions. The aircraft destroyed had a replacement cost approaching $200 million. The trained personnel casualties represented years of specialized aviation training that cannot be rapidly reconstituted. The operational impact of losing the squadron's combat capability rippled through Russian fire support planning for months. This is the fundamental economic logic of drone warfare. The attacker can achieve destruction ratios that make continued investment in expensive defended assets strategically questionable. When a $2 million strike reliably destroys a $200 million target, the defender faces a math problem with no comfortable solution. The third lesson is about patience. This operation worked because Ukrainian planners were willing to invest months of preparation for a single strike. The intelligence collection, the pattern analysis, the window identification, the purpose-built weapon development. None of it happened quickly. All of it happened before a single drone was armed. Modern high-value target strikes are not spontaneous. They are engineered. The operation begins not when the first drone launches, but when the first intelligence asset starts collecting data on the target. The months of preparation before launch are not waiting. They are working. Now, the answer to the quiz. How many Ka-52 helicopters did Ukraine confirm destroyed in the initial battle damage assessment? The answer is B7. 7 Ka-52 Alligators destroyed outright in the direct strike phases, with 3 additional airframes assessed as beyond economical repair. The initial Ukrainian General Staff report confirmed 7 total losses. OSINT analysis of available satellite imagery subsequently identified debris patterns consistent with that figure. 2 airframes in the most heavily reinforced positions survived with significant but theoretically repairable damage, though whether those aircraft were ever returned to operational status remains unconfirmed in available open-source reporting. 7 confirmed losses cannot be understated. The Ka-52 is not a weapon Russia can rapidly replace. Domestic production constraints, the loss of imported components from sanctioned suppliers, and the competing demands of a multi-front war have combined to make Russian rotary-wing aviation a genuinely scarce resource. Destroying 7 of them in a single operation, at a single base, in under 15 minutes of active engagement time, was not just a tactical success, it was a strategic one. 3 questions before we close. Was the Russian commander's decision to prioritize personnel evacuation over aircraft preservation the right call? Given the circumstances, multiple simultaneous strikes, fires spreading across the maintenance area, ongoing drone threat, the case for personnel preservation is strong. Aircraft cannot be saved from inside burning revetments. Trained aviation personnel, if they survive, can eventually fly other aircraft. But the decision left several airframes that might have been repositioned sitting in place for the third wave. A different choice might have saved 1 or 2. Is that worth the additional personnel risk? Real-time command decisions rarely have clean answers. Could the Russian air defense network have prevented this strike with better preparation? Almost certainly yes, but with an important qualification. A network specifically calibrated to counter the electronic warfare suppression sequence used in this attack, with operators trained against this exact threat profile, would have had a much better chance of defeating it. A network calibrated for yesterday's threats, facing today's weapons, operated by crews who had never encountered this specific attack profile. That network was going to struggle regardless of how capable its individual components were. Preparation is specific. Readiness against vague threats is not the same as readiness against real ones. What would you have done differently planning this base's defense? Not the Russian response after the fact. The planning decisions made months before. Where would you have positioned additional sensors? How would you have structured the shift rotation to maintain peak alertness during the helicopter return window? How would you have hardened against the specific vulnerability of the post-sortie maintenance period? Think about it. Because those questions are exactly what the next generation of base defenders on every side of every future conflict will be studying. Real tactics. Real consequences. EastAlert. Subscribe to EastAlert, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. If you want to understand how modern warfare actually works, not the simplified version, not the propaganda version, but the real operational picture with real weapons and real consequences, this channel is where you need to be. The airbase on the peninsula is quieter now, dispersed, degraded. Whatever replacement aircraft arrive will come into a base that now understands something it did not before. No position is untouchable, no squadron is safe, no air defense network is complete. And somewhere, right now, Ukrainian drone operators are watching another base, logging another sortie cycle, identifying another window. Patience, precision, consequence. The wrecks remain on that peninsula. Burned metal, melted rotor blades, the silent geometry of airframes that once carried some of Russia's most advanced combat aviation capability and now carry a single lesson instead. Modern warfare punishes tactical mistakes without mercy, and no amount of concrete changes that. Stay vigilant.